How we do this, we are the truest. Got these fangs super sharp, your shit toothless. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish. In the graveyard, acting foolish. Finna dance with the devil to no music. Cold-hearted, yeah we ruthless. All the ghouls in the cut, let's get ghoulish.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of a podcast called Ghoulish. I am Max Booth, an undead host, surrounded by dogs who won't calm down, so I'm just going to continue saying this intro because I'm sick of redoing it. I have a book. It's called MAGGOTS Screaming. It's been out a few months now. I think it's the best book I've written. The audiobook, narrated by John Wayne Comunale, is finally finished, and it's available on all the places you can buy audiobooks. But also, I'm going to just go ahead and upload it to my podcast feed. Feel free. It's a long audiobook. It's about 10, maybe 11 hours long. So I'm going to split it up into 5 episodes, I think, because the book is told in 5 installments. This is section 1 of the book. Autolysis is what it's called. It's Stage 1 of human decomposition. As you will quickly find out, the book is split up into 5 sections, and each section is named after a different stage of decomposition. So this is section 1, stage 1 of my book, MAGGOTS Screaming. If you like it, spread the word. Tell people about it. Maybe leave some reviews on places you leave book reviews. I am going to be posting these sections throughout this week and next week. Assuming my fucking dogs don't kill me. My God. Okay. Enjoy MAGGOTS Screaming. I put everything I had into it. So this is all I have. This is all I have. Take it or leave it, folks. I hope you take it. And then leave it? I don't know if you would leave it. Anyway, enjoy. Fucking hell. Enjoy.
Ghoulish Books presents Maggots Screaming by Max Booth III, narrated by John Wayne Comunale. Part 1. Autolysis. This is the story of how we found you. Maybe you already know it. There's no telling what's in that head of yours. More than likely, you know more than I ever will, and that's okay. I don't need to know everything. Some things aren't meant to be known. Some things can't be known, no matter how hard you try to understand them. I wish Dad could have figured that out sooner. I wish so many things. It's about the only thing I can do where we are now. Wish things. Wishes that will never come true. No matter how loud I scream at the sky, nobody is listening. But nobody worth a damn anyway. And that's okay too. But here is what I do know. It started with a finger, poking out of the dirt in Mom's garden like a flower composed of flesh, pointing directly at the sun. The sun in Texas is different than the suns in other states. In Texas, the sun can't be ignored. In Texas, the sun controls everything living and dead. In Texas, the sun is a hero and the sun is a villain. It's a mad scientist holding an entire state hostage. In Texas, we ask the sun permission before we do anything, because if we don't, we know the consequences will be dire. So it made sense that the mysterious object, the finger sprouting from the dirt, would be worshiping the same burning star everybody here worships. Anything else would have been considered blasphemy. I noticed it first. My shovel made contact as I attempted to dig up the desecrated hibiscus. I thought maybe it was another root. They'd proven tricky to dig around, and even after Dad moistened the earth with a hose. Some of the roots I'd managed to splinter by driving the tip of my shovel down with all my strength. By then, blisters had already started forming on my fingers, and I was secretly looking forward to squeezing them until they burst. There's something thrilling about that clear juice trickling down your palm afterward. Is it always in you, waiting for the right blister to make its escape? I don't think it's pus. Pus is thicker and more yellow. Plus, it has that smell to it. The kind that makes you feel like maybe there's an unknown disease percolating somewhere inside you. I nudged the thing sticking out of the ground with my toe, testing how firm of a hold the earth had on it, and the object bent forward, like a metallic mailbox flag. "What is that?" I asked. Behind me, raking bush debris into a trash can, Dad said, "What's what?" "That!" I dropped the shovel and pointed at the thing sticking out of the ground. "What is it?" "It's nothing," he said, then stared a little longer, then kneeled in the wet dirt and touched it. "Where did this come from? Did you put it here?" "I didn't do anything. I just found it." He lay on his stomach, pressing his face inches from the object, studying it from various angles, whispering, "What the fuck?" over and over, almost like he was hypnotized by our discovery, like he would have kept repeating the same question for the rest of his life if left undisturbed. I shouted his name and he jerked away from the object. His eyes were wild with an emotion I couldn't understand. "What is it?" I asked again, and this time I didn't want to know the answer, but he told me anyway. The finger led to more fingers, which led to a hand, which led to a wrist, which led to an arm. Guess where the arm led? Dad relieved me of shovel duty. As he worked, I hovered over him a little too closely, watching the hole widen, only semi-aware of the spade swinging back inches from my face, of the rogue clumps of dirt flinging haphazardly. If I got hit in the crossfire, the pain would have been worth it. There was a body in our yard, and I was going to absorb every detail, no matter the cost. The only reason Dad decided to make this garden our weekend project was because of Mom's boyfriend. His name's Miguel, but if you ask Dad what his name is, he's liable to tell you it's that fucking traitor piece of shit cocksucker. You see, Miguel and Dad used to be friends. Them and this other guy, this kind of weird guy named Andy. The three of them did everything together. I never had much of a problem with Miguel. Andy, though, he always came off as a little spooky. But he had a great dog named Comrade, so sometimes him coming over wasn't as bad as it could have been. I remember one time when I was much younger, they took me on a fishing trip. Not like the kind of fishing trip you see in movies. We didn't own a boat or nothing fancy like that. But there's this bridge outside the limits of Guadalupe County. Nothing you can drive on or anything. A little rickety bridge with a roof cover. It connects one end of a bike trail to another. Under the bridge is a small river, or a lake, or a stream maybe. I don't know the difference between them. Dad's told me before, but sometimes when people tell me things, it's like they get deleted from my brain before I have a chance to latch on to any of the words. It's a little tricky, but if you're careful and maintain the right balance, you can maneuver yourself below the bridge and sit on the big rocks next to the water. Dad and Miguel and Andy used to do it as kids, I guess, and still did it as adults. I would always beg them to take me. I guess eventually my begging wore them down, and they brought me along. Nearly fell and broke my ankle trying to get to that fishing spot. Dad had to keep grabbing my arm to help me stay standing. He didn't seem annoyed about it, more like it made him feel good to be saving me over and over, like it made him feel useful. Sometimes people need to feel like that, I've discovered. Otherwise, they start wondering what they're even doing here. Once we got down there, him and Miguel and Andy cracked open the cooler and drank every can of beer floating in the melted ice. I drank 2 cans of Big Red they brought along specifically for me. Before we called it quits, I'd end up catching a catfish. I wanted to take it home with us, but Dad said they never took fish home. They were strictly catch and release fishermen. They didn't know the first thing about properly preparing fish. "Come on, Max," Miguel had said. "It's the boy's first catch. You gotta preserve that moment somehow, don't you?" And I guess the guilt trip worked its charm over Dad, since he sighed and helped me trap the catfish in the cooler. When we got home, the fish was no longer moving. Dad wrestled its awkward, lifeless body into a plastic bag and stuck it in the freezer until he could figure out what to do with it, and I went off to play Xbox. A little while later, Mom returned from the grocery store. She opened the freezer, saw the bag Dad had left there, and picked it up. "What's this?" she asked us. And that was when the bag started moving. My fish hadn't died after all. She shrieked and whipped the bag against the wall, and now it was for real dead. We threw it away instead of eating it, since none of us knew how to cook it, and plus, we were all secretly terrified it was somehow still alive, even though no one would admit it out loud. 2 years later, Mom and Dad were getting divorced, and a couple months after that, Mom and Miguel started dating. Now, Dad and Miguel don't talk to each other, and Dad's always in a bad mood. On the Friday we found you, Dad was in one of the worst moods I'd ever seen him in. It was his weekend to have me, according to the courts, and I guess Mom and Miguel got the dates mixed up somehow because they'd planned this big weekend getaway down in Corpus Christi. Miguel had rented a cabin near the beach and everything. Apparently, he couldn't get his deposit reimbursed on it, and the rental place refused to reschedule us, so it had to be this weekend. Mom either forgot or intentionally neglected to tell Dad until late Thursday night. The following morning, bright and early, Dad was banging on our door, face tomato red. "You are not taking my son on my weekend." He practically screamed once Mom opened the door, still half asleep. I could hear them arguing from my bedroom. The whole neighborhood could hear them. The whole planet. One time, at a friend's birthday party, this squirrel fell out of a tree and broke its legs. It went crazy and crawled around the front yard trying to attack us. My friend's mom called the police station, and they sent out a cop, and the cop walked up to us with this real big grin on his face and said, "Watch this, kiddos," then shot the squirrel in the face, and it exploded all over the grass, painted the green this terrible red. Everybody started screaming and crying, and my friend's mom tried reassuring us the cop had done the humane thing, that the squirrel needed to be put out of its misery. I suddenly couldn't stop thinking about that birthday party while listening to Dad and Mom argue out on the front porch. Dad was screaming like that squirrel had been screaming, consumed by rage. I got scared someone would call a cop and come put him out of his misery too. If this continued much longer, what choice would anyone have? I wondered if he'd be the same cop, and if he'd be wearing the same satisfied smile as he executed my father. "Dylan has been talking about this trip all week," Mom was saying when I tiptoed down the hallway. "Do you really want to break his little heart just because of what? Your ego can't handle him having fun without you?" "It's not about my ego," Dad said. I peeked around the edge of the hallway and spied on their argument. Dad on one side of the screen door and Mom on the other. "It's about the agreement. You had him last weekend, did you not? Am I crazy? Did I imagine that?" "No." "Then that must mean this weekend is my weekend, right? Is that not the agreement we came to in a court of law?" He sighed and paced around the front porch, rubbing his hands through his hair. "What good's an agreement if it can be broken at the slightest inconvenience? Why bother making one in the first place, huh? You say it's just this one time you need him on my weekend, but what about my next weekend? What happens when you need him then, too? Don't you think I need him just as much as you? Don't you think I miss him something fierce? You break the agreement now, and who knows what unfolds? You might not realize it yet, but this is your attempt to steal him away from me forever. This is you planting a seed that sprouts the tree, me no longer being in his life. Max, you're being ridiculous. If Miguel hadn't put down the deposit already, it wouldn't. He shoved a finger on the screen door, inches from her face, like he was trying to penetrate her skull with telekinesis. Don't you dare mention that motherfucker's name to me. God damn you. God damn both of you. I thought about the squirrel and how quickly its sickness had ruined a perfectly good birthday party, and stepped forward into the living room. It's okay, Mom. I want to go with Dad anyway. She gave me a look like I was acting just as ridiculous as my father, and I never felt more connected to him. Dylan, be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I do. I want to go with him. She always said that. You don't know what you're talking about. Whenever I contradicted her in some way, and it made my blood boil. Like Dad's blood was boiling out on the porch. Like it had been boiling since she texted him that we'd be down in Corpus this weekend. Shoot. His blood had done been boiling much longer than that. Probably since at least the divorce, and certainly once Miguel started dating Mom. Whose blood wouldn't look like a witch's cauldron at that point? She shook her head, not believing the betrayal coming out of my mouth. You're coming with us, and that's final. You heard what he said, Dad said, gesturing down at me. Even if he doesn't want to go, and you're still trying to violate the court order. What kind of mother are you? Prying a son from his father for no good reason? No good reason at all. You ought to be ashamed. Instead of responding, she just sighed there on our side of the screen door. I could feel her surrendering next to me, and a sickness blossomed in my stomach. Of course, I would have preferred to join her and Miguel on our little getaway. She was right. I'd been looking forward to the trip all week. But couldn't she see what this would do to my father? Couldn't she predict the possible consequences that might unfold due to this violation? As I hid in the hallway listening to them fight, an infinite amount of timelines spanned in my mind. One where we left for Corpus, and Dad went home and drank himself into a coma. The kind of coma a person never woke up from. One where he followed us to Corpus and waited until we were asleep, then abducted me in the night and burned the cabin to the ground with Mom and Miguel still inside. One where Dad didn't have the patience to wait and allowed his rage to consume him whole out here in Mom's front yard, and so on and so on. Going with him instead of Mom and Miguel seemed like the only logical method of preventing the unthinkable. To be fair, I did not consider my father a violent man. He had never hit my mom. To the best of my memory, light spankings when I was younger had been the only times he'd ever laid hands on me. Yes, he often got angry, but that didn't qualify him as a murderer. Everybody gets mad. Rage is in human DNA just as love and hunger and sadness is. And sometimes rage gets out of control. Sometimes you can't help it. Squirrels are considered cute and adorable, but sometimes they go mad and try to kill everything in their path, and the only way to stop them is to call a cop to come blow their brains out. If a squirrel can do that, then under the correct set of circumstances, so could my father. I didn't understand why Mom couldn't see that. You'll be there until Monday, she told me as I gathered my belongings. Dad was waiting out in his truck, trying to cool off with the AC. No way in hell would she have allowed him to enter her new house, especially not after the tantrum he'd thrown on the porch. We won't be able to come pick you up if you get bored. You know that, right? Yes, Mom, I said, refusing to look at her as I shoveled a fistful of clothes in my bag. I know. I just don't understand why you suddenly don't want to come to Corpus with us. All week long you've done nothing but talk about that beach, and now you don't care? What happened? I crammed one last comic book in my backpack and zipped it up, then slung it over my shoulders. I finally looked at her and noticed a single tear struggling to remain constrained in the corner of her eye. Because it's not fair to Dad. So what? She said, whispering now so he didn't somehow overhear us from his truck outside. Since when has he ever been fair with us? Mom, it's his weekend. We should have never planned this trip for his weekend. It was a mistake, she said, and I didn't know if I believed her. Well, what do you always say about mistakes? I asked her, and when I stepped forward, she stepped back. Don't you always say, own up to them? Yes, but I don't want to hurt his feelings, I told her, whispering again. I know you don't care about that, but I do. He's still my dad. Her mouth opened and closed for a brief, cartoonish second. Then she sat at the edge of my bed with her hands folded in her lap. Okay, I'm sorry. She sucked in a breath. I wasn't thinking about it that way, and I apologize. Thank you. If you want to go with your dad, you can go with your dad. I hugged her, and she squeezed me like she'd never see me again. I tried to squirm away, but her grip was impenetrable. I love you, Dylan, she whispered into my ear. I love you too, I told her. The screen door banged shut from the living room, and I shot out of her embrace like I had something to feel ashamed about. Miguel's voice rang out in the hallway. Hello? Y'all know Max is sitting out front? He poked his head around my doorframe with a puzzled expression written all over his face. I tried to say hi, but he wouldn't roll down his window. As we were pulling out of the driveway, Mom told me not to spend the whole weekend in front of the TV, and I lied and told her I wouldn't. Infinite screen time was one of the few perks of sleeping over at Dad's since the divorce. We often stayed up past midnight, eating greasy pizza and watching action movies from his childhood. They don't make 'em like they used to, I'll tell you that, he'd mumble next to me on the couch, usually around the midway point of a six-pack, both of us illuminated by the glow of his little television set. Not the big one we used to have there. Mom took that with us when we moved out. Now it remains in our living room, where we barely use it. Apparently, staring at the screen long enough rots your brain. She also smokes 2 packs of cigarettes a day, so sometimes I wonder if she's the best person to be giving health advice. Honestly, she should have left the TV with Dad. At least at his place, it would have been properly loved. Either way, those parting words of hers as we backed out of the driveway, they latched onto Dad like a leech. Don't spend the whole weekend in front of that TV, he mimicked her voice as if she were a bird in the process of being pecked alive by a much larger predator. The hell was she trying to imply, anyway? He nudged me with his shoulder and glanced away from the road. What have you two been talking about? You telling her all we do is watch TV? I shook my head. I haven't been telling her anything. You saying we don't play together? That I don't take you places? I never said that. Last time you came over, didn't we play mini golf? I nodded. We did, at the pizza place with the movie theater. And did you tell her about that? What? Did you tell her I took you mini golfing? I don't remember. You don't remember? His face got all screwed up as he looked at me again, and my whole body tensed, silently begging he'd return his gaze to the road before getting us in an accident. I take you out, spend my good hard-earned money on a place like mini golf, and you don't even tell your mom about it? I didn't say I didn't tell her, I just don't remember. That was a long time ago. Dylan, it's been 2 weeks. I sucked in a breath, hating the interrogation. Maybe I did tell her. Well, you either did or you didn't. I think I did. And what did she say about that? She said it was nice. He jerked his head so suddenly, I thought he was going to swerve the truck into a tree. Nice? What kind of response is that? Is it nice for a father to take care of his son now? Like I don't always? What else did she say? Dad, I don't remember. He shook his head, mumbling something, more in conversation with himself than anyone else. Nice. Jesus Christ, I'll show her nice. He was starting to unsettle me a little. The way his brain worked sometimes when it came to Mom, he could fixate on the tiniest detail and obsess over them for the rest of the night, trying to pry more information from me. I cleared my throat and tried to change the subject. So, what do you want to do today? Well, God forbid we spend time together watching TV. We could continue our Simpsons marathon, or play Zombies Ate My Neighbors. It's not a big deal. Wouldn't want to be a terrible father or anything. You're not a terrible father. He glanced down at me again and smiled. Thanks. That means a lot. You're a great dad, I told him. The best dad I know. His smile spread wider, and he returned his eyes to the road just in time to see a red light and slammed on the brakes. We sat there watching traffic pass in front of us, neither of us saying a word. A truck with a lawn care company name stenciled across the driver's side door took its sweet time crossing the road. A trailer was hitched to the back of it, storing an assortment of mowers and weed whackers and other lawn equipment. Dad let out a laugh once the truck was out of sight. What's so funny? I asked, not liking the way he sounded. Your mom doesn't want you watching TV. That's fine, no problem. I just thought of a great father-son project we could do together. Something I've been meaning to take care of since she moved out. Why not today, right? Why not? When I was younger, a baby really, barely old enough to form coherent memories, Mom planted a garden in the backyard. A little patch of life next to our tall wooden perimeter fence, 20 feet wide, 6 feet long, consisting of 4 boxwood hedges along the fence, followed by a morning glory, a hibiscus, a lantana, then 2 Texas sages on either side. Most 13-year-old boys don't know the names of plants. None of my friends would have been able to name any of them. I probably wouldn't have publicly admitted to possessing this knowledge either. At least not at school. But I could certainly remember Mom talking about the plants when we used to live at Dad's house. They were her pride and joy. I remember going out and helping her water them. I remember posing in front of the hibiscus as it bloomed so Mom could take plenty of photos to post on Facebook. The hibiscus was her favorite. The very definition of beautiful, she once said about it. Who knows how many years ago, then pinched my cheek and added, just like you. I protested when Dad first revealed his plan. That's Mom's garden. We can't kill it. He shook his head, smiling. Ah, but that's exactly why we should kill it. Don't you see? No. We were standing out on the back patio. Across the yard, against the fence, was Mom's garden. The idea of removing it seemed like a sin. I felt guilty merely entertaining the idea and prayed Mom never found out about this conversation. Dad did not try to shield his impatience as he rubbed between his eyes. Think of it like this, okay? Mom and I are never getting back together, right? I don't know. Oh, come on, you don't know. Yeah, you do. We all know. It's not happening. Okay. Sorry to break it to you, kiddo, but your mom, she's a lot happier without me. I don't like it, but it doesn't matter what I like. Facts are facts. We tried to make it work and I failed, or she failed, or maybe we were never meant to be together in the first place. Who knows? Maybe the only reason we were ever supposed to meet, the whole point of fate pinning us in the same room, was to squeeze you out of my dick, right? Well, mission accomplished, I guess. Dad, I shouted, grimacing and laughing at the same time. I stepped away from him, out of the shade next to the door and deeper into the yard. Sweat generated the instant the sun made contact with my flesh. It was supposed to get up to 105 degrees at some point that day, and I was not looking forward to it. He scratched his head, watching my retreat with curiosity. What I'm trying to say is there's been a separation, and everybody seems to be on board with the separation, except for me. Mom has moved on. You seem okay with it. I'm not. He held up his hand, palm out. It's fine. You ought to be okay with it. What other choice do you got, right? And I guess the same question ought to be directed toward myself. What other choice do I got? Not much. I could sit at home every day and get drunk and sad and try to think of a way to win her back. Or I could finally grow a pair and move on. It's been, 2 years now? He paused as a fresh sadness morphed his face. Wow. Holy shit. 2 years, huh? Okay. He scratched his cheek, lost in his thoughts, then spit in the grass and pointed at the garden. Your mom was able to move on. That's fine. She has a new house. She has a new boyfriend. She has friends. She has you practically whenever she wants you. But me, I got what? I got the house, sure. But that's only because it belonged to my own mom, your grandmother. Obviously, she wasn't going to take that too. But what does that mean? It means every day I wake up and the first thing I see out the window is that. Those dead flowers that ain't ever gonna blossom again. Just like me and your mom, right? We ain't ever gonna blossom again either, are we? This metaphor laughing at me every day I get dressed for work? Or is that an analogy? Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. She's gone, but her footprints are everywhere, and I ain't ever gonna get past this until I erase them somehow and figure out a way to start fresh. He clamped a hand around my shoulder, a little too hard. I tried not to wince. And that's where I need your help, son. If I do this alone, I'm afraid I'm not strong enough. But with you by my side, it'll almost be like we're forming a new kind of bond. Something that lasts forever, no matter what. Because you know what we'll do after digging up your mom's old plants? We'll take a drive on down to Lowe's and pick out a new garden together. One you and I will plant, as father and son. He smiled, getting lost in his own fantasy. This way, every morning when I get ready to make my deliveries, I won't be forced to think about your mom. I'll be reminded of the quality time we spent together this weekend, a weekend nobody will ever be able to take away from us. And maybe life won't be so goddamn miserable. Doesn't that sound nice? What it takes to destroy a garden. Gloves, a hedge trimmer, bypass loppers, a rake, and a shovel. Also, empty trash cans and plenty of water. Water to stay hydrated and water to moisten the dirt. Maybe other methods exist, but this is the way my dad taught me on that Friday that we found you. The Friday that changed everything. My reluctancy to kill something Mom had planted faded as soon as Dad gave me permission to use the hedge trimmer, which was probably the next best thing to an actual chainsaw. Mom would not have allowed me within 6 feet of the hedge trimmer, but Dad, on the other hand, giggled and told me to go wild. Just don't go cutting your fucking arm off, he said. Imagine the kind of shit your mother would give me if she came back from Corpus and you was without an arm. Good God, I'd never hear the end of it. I won't cut my arm off, I promised him. Attaboy. He patted me on the shoulder and showed me how to handle the hedge trimmer. I'd imagined operating the machine would have been far more complicated than what the reality ended up being. The trickiest part was getting it started. Using one hand, you had to grip the handle, inch your thumb up and slide a safety guard forward, then squeeze the trigger before letting the safety guard fall into place. Dad could do it no problem since he had giant hands. My thumb barely reached the safety guard, and the whole machine was heavier than he made it out to be, and I had to hold it up with 2 hands, otherwise the weight would sag my arm down, which seemed like a pretty surefire way to mutilate one of my legs. But once I got it going, things were peachy as long as I didn't stop squeezing the trigger, which I had to do every 30 seconds or so to give my hand a break from the hedge trimmer's jerky vibrations. The plants were mostly dead. It had not rained in several weeks, if not months, and Dad clearly hadn't been watering them. As I trimmed away at the wild bushes, Dad brought out his stereo and hooked it up to the outlet on the outside of the house next to the patio. Within seconds, one of his beloved Black Sabbath CDs started blaring in the backyard. The one with that Iron Man song on it that I like so much. I don't know what it's called. It's about Iron Man, but it's really not. At least not the one I know about. That's what Dad always said, but I don't know if he knew for real or was just trying to give me a hard time. With the music blaring loud enough to irritate the neighbors, he scooped up the bypass loppers from the grass and started snipping off any branches too thick for the hedge trimmers to eat through. Every time he snapped the handles together, he let out an exaggerated karate movie grunt and screwed up his face so he looked like he had delivered a great deadly blow to one of our many enemies. Maneuvering the hedge trimmer proved to be slightly more difficult while giggling at Dad's antics, but somehow I managed not to drop it on my foot or cut my arm off, which I already vowed not to do under any circumstances. If possible, I intended to keep my promise. I loved it when he acted goofy like this. It reminded me of how things used to be before everything changed, before Mom fell out of love with him and decided we would live somewhere else. When I was younger, his silliness would make her laugh just as much as it would for me, but in those months before they informed me of the impending divorce, I noticed a change unfold. Dad's jokes got less frequent. Yes, but when he did try to play around with us, Mom wouldn't smile like she used to smile. Instead, she seemed annoyed. It got to a point where the mere sound of his voice provoked a negative reaction. When they finally told me their plans, I was not surprised, but it didn't mean it hurt any less. It was good to see him acting silly again, even if we were destroying Mom's garden. After cutting the bushes down to their stumps, we raked the fallen branches and leaves into a trash can and surveyed our progress. We'd been working for a little over an hour at this point, and both of us were drenched with sweat. The sun had not given us a break, even for a second. I was reminded of the many times I'd cooked fire ants with a magnifying glass, and reckoned this was some sort of revenge. I deserved nothing less for my flesh to burst into flames. "Now what?" I asked, panting. "Next we gotta dig up those stumps." He was panting just as hard. "Gonna be a pain in the ass, I'm guessing. It being a drought and all." "Because the ground's dry?" "Exactamundo." He scratched his chin and calmly paced around the desecrated garden. "It's looking pretty good, though, ain't it?" "I can't believe it's gone," I said, trying not to frown and failing. The frown turned out to be contagious. He clapped me between my shoulders the way fathers clap their sons in TV shows. "What did I say, huh? Tomorrow, you and me are going to stock up at Lowe's, get ourselves a brand new garden. Something real special, right?" "Okay." "What kind of plants you thinking we ought to get?" The thought of what we would replace Mom's garden with had not occurred to me until then. "Maybe something that can grow food," I said, "like tomatoes or something." "Oh," Dad said, glancing at the stumps. "You're thinking about one of those kinds of gardens." "We don't have to," I said, slumping my head. "It's just an idea. We can do whatever." He grinned. "You know, I love myself some tomatoes." The talk of tomatoes made us realize how hungry we'd gotten during our workout. Somehow it was already past noon. Dad got out the hose and laid the end in the middle of the soil and partially twisted the nozzle so a small portion of water trickled out. "We don't get it wet, we ain't ever gonna get those stumps out. Trust me," he said, leading me across the yard and through the back door. We took turns washing our hands at the kitchen sink, then piled into his pickup and headed down the street to Whataburger. Along the way, we listened to another Black Sabbath CD. Windows down, volume cranked. Cars next to us stared like we were lunatics, like they were afraid of us, like they envied us. The music was uncomfortably loud, and as a result, it targeted a spotlight on us, which made me feel embarrassed and thrilled and terrified all at once. I didn't want anybody to look at us, yet at the same time yearned for the world to know we existed. I got my usual, the grilled cheese meal with a Coke and a chocolate chip cookie. Dad got a patty melt. We returned to his house and ate at the kitchen table. I split my cookie with him, and he gave me some of his onion rings. He liked to dip onion rings in blue cheese dressing and often encouraged me to give it a try, but I refused. Just the smell of blue cheese held the potential to ruin my appetite. No way I was going to allow some of it in my mouth. Look, if you think I'm delaying the inevitable, you are correct. This Whataburger was our last normal meal together before everything got crazy. Before we unearthed what could not be reburied. Before we found you. But what's the point in telling you about that kind of stuff? It's not what you want to hear. Is it? After we finished eating, neither of us had the energy to resume our yard work. I suggested we surrender and watch The Simpsons for a while, but Dad shook his head and said we'd never get up again if we sat on the couch, which was a fair point, so we played a game of gin rummy at the kitchen table, then chugged a bunch of water and forced ourselves outside. My stomach dragged. It felt like I'd swallowed a ship anchor. The desire to nap intensified until I could focus on little more. Dad nudged me along and told me next time we'd eat only salads if Whataburger was going to affect me so badly. I wanted to tell him I'd never seen him eat a salad in his life, but he was sensitive about his weight, even if he acted like he wasn't. We forgot to move the hose after picking up lunch. The earth had transformed into a small quagmire. Dad groaned and made a comment about next month's water bill. We stood over the black water overflowing into the grass. It all looked strangely beautiful, the destruction of earth and merging of garden and yard. I could have remained in place watching all day, all night, forever, long after the water flooded our yard. After it swallowed me whole along with everything else in the neighborhood, somehow I would still be watching. Then Dad said, "I read somewhere it's impossible to drown yourself." He licked his lips, steadying his thoughts. "Like if you're in the bathtub and you try forcing your head down in the water, nothing's gonna happen. Your, what do you call them? Your internal reflexes kick in. And whether you want to live or not, they don't give you much choice." "Oh," I said, nodding along thoughtfully. "Okay." "That's why, if you really want to drown, what you gotta do is find a bridge that extends over a lake." "Like the one you and Miguel used to go fishing at?" I asked and immediately regretted uttering his name. Except, instead of getting mad or sad like I expected, he grinned. "Exactly. You get a bridge like that, tie several bricks to both of your feet, then jump off the side. Gravity will take care of the rest, and it won't matter one lick how much your reflexes try to fight the inevitable." I shuffled my feet and tried to think about how to respond to something like that. Nothing came to mind. I scooped up the shovel and asked him if he wanted me to start digging. "Yeah," he said, excited. "Let's do this." The first body we found was Dad's. We didn't recognize him at first, there being so much dirt on his face and all, Plus, we were too overcome with shock that comes with discovering there's a body buried in your backyard to really assign any identity to the person. You were the second body, but again, it took us a bit to piece it together. At first, it looked like a slightly smaller copy of the first body, which wasn't far from the truth. Dad dug faster, more frantic. Neither of us verbally acknowledged our discovery. The bodies were laid out side by side, shoulder to shoulder, spanning the width of the garden. On the left was Dad, then you, and the body on the right, the one that made our brains finally click and accept the reality of the situation. "Oh my God," Dad said, dropping to his knees at the edge of the hole. "Mom?" I whispered, too afraid to get any closer. But it was her. It couldn't be anybody else, which meant the other two bodies, you and the larger one, they had to be us, Dad and me. All three of us together again, like some kind of family. The bodies were naked, you and the other two. Maybe that was another reason it took so long to recognize y'all. How often does a 13-year-old boy think about his own parents without any clothes on? Yet, there they were, in the garden grave, everything out for me to see. Not just them, but also you, or me, or both of us, however you want to think about it. All of those things that got me sad when standing in front of a mirror within the privacy of the bathroom were now displayed out under the sun. If I hadn't been paralyzed with confusion, I would have fetched a blanket from inside the house to cover up your shriveled genitals. Instead, I sat on the grass Indian style, waiting for Dad to react in a way that would confirm we were hallucinating, or this was only a dream, or whatever. Anything to convince me none of this was real. I didn't start crying until after he started, and neither of us could stop. Eventually, we exhausted ourselves of tears. The Black Sabbath album had long expired in the CD player. The only noises present in the backyard were our noses sniffling snot and cicadas buzzing in some unknowable place. After a while, even the sun had decided to pack it in. Nothing wanted any part of whatever this was. We were alone, forced to deal with it ourselves. The bodies appeared less threatening without the sun irradiating their flesh, less real, almost easier to convince ourselves you belonged in some dream reality separate from our own. "Okay," Dad said, rubbing his face. "Let's go." He reached down and helped me stand, then led me through the back door. The house felt different, insignificant. How could anywhere else ever be as important as our yard? I already yearned to return outside and visit the mysterious garden grave. Idling around the kitchen only seemed like an unnecessary distraction. Dad had his cell phone out, dialing a number. "Are you calling the police?" I asked, and he looked at me like I was crazy. "Your mother." "Why?" Again, that same look. He pointed at the door. "I need to make sure she's okay." He paced around the kitchen with the cell phone pressed against the side of his head. I got a glass of ice water and sat at the table. His anxiety was contagious, and before long, my legs couldn't stop bouncing up and down. Come on, come on, come on," he was mumbling, waiting for someone to answer. Then he lit up. "Lori, hey, it's me. I just wanted to... No, everything is fine. Yeah, everything's good. We just hadn't heard anything from y'all and wanted... Yes, we wanted to make sure y'all got there okay and everything. You know, just a checkup or whatever." He clicked his tongue listening to her talk. "No, he's already asleep. It's not that early. Come on, what do you want me to do? We had a long day." "What do you mean, doing what? Father and son activities, that's what." "Yeah, I'll have him call you in the morning." "Calm down. Shit. You're the one who didn't think to call beforehand. Now, you're trying to act like it's my fault or something. Well, excuse me for checking up on you. Next time, I won't bother. He hung up, but it was unclear which one of them had gotten to the end call button first. By the sound of things, it was likely a draw. Jesus, he said. What is wrong with that woman? Dad, I said, the rim of the water glass rubbing against my lips. What are we gonna do? He stopped and glanced down at me, like he was shocked I was still in the kitchen with him. What do you mean? I nodded at the back door. What are we? He waved the question away. No way am I prepared to answer something like that right now. Shouldn't we call someone? Someone like who? Dad snickered. The law? I shrugged. Didn't seem like such a bad idea. He sat at the kitchen table across from me, all jittery. What do you think's gonna happen if we do that? If we call... He nodded impatient. Yes, if we call the law. I don't know. They'll help? Help? Yes. Okay, that's fair, he said and raised his pointer finger. But what exactly do you think we need help with? I didn't understand why he was being so obnoxious. It seemed so clear in my head, but any time I tried to open my mouth, all I'd do is stutter and trip over my own words. After a few failed attempts, I gave up and pointed at the door again, hoping that would be enough of an explanation. Dad leaned against his kitchen chair and lightly drummed his fingers along the table. Okay, Dylan. Let's think about this. Okay, I said, unsure why he assumed I hadn't already been thinking about it. What else could I have possibly been thinking about? Let's pretend those bodies outside are normal bodies, and there's nothing out of the ordinary about them. Let's pretend they're not, well, you know. Us? Those bodies, they're fresh. They haven't decomposed or anything like that. We get the law down here, nobody's going to believe that some previous occupant of this house might be responsible. Whoever buried them out there, it happened recently. You understand what I'm saying? They aren't old? Exactly. They're fresh deaths. Fresh enough that the law will require some kind of explanation from me better than, I just found them here, officer, I swear to God. This here's my property, and with me having a rap sheet, shit's already not exactly in my favor. But again, that's all pretending everything's normal, that we found regular bodies. We didn't find regular bodies, though, did we? I shook my head. Dylan, he said, leaning forward, I need you to do me a favor, okay? I need you to tell me exactly what you saw out there in that hole. I gotta figure out whether or not you and I saw the same thing, or if I'm losing my mind, or whatever the fuck. You know what I mean? Yes? So, what did you see? It was us. I'm gonna need you to be a little more specific. You, me, and I couldn't finish it. And your mother. Are they really us? He shrugged. Dylan, I know about as much as you do right now. He sat at the table thinking, then got up to brew a pot of coffee. It was late in the evening at this point. I'd never seen him drink anything at night besides beer. Why wouldn't you let Mom talk to me? What? You told her I was asleep already, and I couldn't talk on the phone. I thought maybe you'd tell her about what we found out there. Why can't she know? She's out there, too. He shook his head and faced me again. Behind him, coffee dripped into an empty carafe. I don't think there's any reason to bother her, do you? She's on vacation, right? Yes, but... And what would she really do anyway? She wouldn't know any more than we do. Telling her this early would only scare her, and there's no point in scaring your mom unless we absolutely have to, don't you think? Okay. Once we know more about what's going on, then yes, of course, I'll tell her. But right now, I think it's probably smart if we just keep this between me and you. Our own little secret. What do you say? Yes, I said, secretly liking how much he was trusting me about something this significant. Just me and you. Great, he said, clapping his hands and grinning. Now, how about a glass of chocolate milk? We got a long night ahead of us. We each took a bathroom break, then rendezvoused to the kitchen table. Dad with a cup of coffee, and myself with a glass of chocolate milk. He'd sprayed whipped cream in mine as an extra little treat. It tasted so good, for a second, I forgot about the garden grave in our backyard. Then Dad said, "Did you notice they're the same age as we are?" "What?" I said. "The bodies. They weren't younger versions of ourselves or anything. That boy out there in the hole is also 13 years old, just like you. Their physiques, their ages, it's like all three of them are parallel with ourselves. That's how any one of us would have looked. This very morning, we decided, fuck it, stripped naked and crawled into a random grave. But does that make it weirder or somehow less weird? Maybe it's..." I didn't know how to finish the sentence. He looked at me, hopeful, waiting for my idea. So I said the first thing that came to mind. Maybe they're zombies. If they were zombies, don't you think they would have tried eating our brains by now? And besides, what kind of zombies you know look exactly like other people? I don't know. No zombies I ever heard of, I'll tell you that. We sat at the kitchen table for a while, uncertain of what to say or do. Dad poured us more coffee and chocolate milk. Second helpings did not come with whipped cream on top. "This has to be some kind of prank," he finally said. "Those bodies..." He shook his head. "Someone's got to be fucking with us." "Who?" I said. "Why?" He scratched his chin, thinking it over. "Plenty of crazy sons of bitches out there with sick senses of humor. Hell, I bet you they ain't even real corpses." "Well, what are they then?" "Fakes, I imagine." "Like mannequins?" He shrugged. "Shit, could be. I sure as hell didn't touch them, did you?" I told him I hadn't, which he already knew. "As far as we know, they could be made out of plastic, and we've been in here playing with our dicks and freaking ourselves out for no reason." He chugged the rest of his coffee and told me to wait inside. "Why can't I come with?" I asked, despite the thought of seeing you again making me feel sick. I'm sorry to admit, but that's the truth. I was scared. "It's past your bedtime," Dad said, which was the last time someone ever told me that. By the time Dad returned, I'd started wondering what would happen if he never came back. If he walked outside and simply disappeared into the garden grave. Maybe it was some kind of portal that could transport people to alternate dimensions, and he had abandoned me here on the boring earth to visit a new, more exciting reality. But of course, he didn't leave me. The door creaked open and he stepped into the kitchen, looking more confused than the last time I saw him. "Well," I said, "what happened?" He ignored me and grabbed his washed coffee mug from the dish strainer and sat at the kitchen table. He gripped the handle like it was full of liquid. His hands were trembling. "Dad?" I touched his shoulder and he flinched. "What?" I pointed at the door. "Are they real?" "Oh." He raised the empty coffee mug with both hands and pressed it to his lips, hesitating, then lowered it to the table. "I think maybe I'm in over my head here, boy." "What are we going to do?" "I gotta call someone." "Mom?" Best leave her out of this mess." The police? He laughed. What did I already say about that nonsense? Then who? He scratched his head thinking it over, then started digging through his jeans pocket for his cell phone. Andy might know what to do. Oh. I never cared much for Andy. My mom once told me he was a bit off his rocker, which was her way of politely describing him as batshit crazy. Before the divorce, Andy and Dad and Miguel all fished together, got drunk in our living room during basketball games, went out bowling. They were practically inseparable. Then Miguel betrayed Dad and, as consequence, disbanded the trio. Dad hadn't spoken to Miguel since. I wasn't sure exactly what Andy's role was in all of this, but I saw him hanging out more with Miguel lately than Dad. Sometimes I feared Dad didn't have any friends left. Maybe I was the only person he had left. No wonder he freaked out so much when he found out about this Corpus Christi getaway. Dad stepped out on the backyard patio to call Andy. I pressed my ear against the window and eavesdropped as best I could. Hey, yeah, it's me. Listen, No, I'm not calling about that. I don't give a shit. Man, listen, okay? Would you fucking listen? I got something going on over here. Something freaky. I don't know what to do. I can't tell you over the phone. It's the kind of thing you won't believe unless you see it with your own two eyes. Yeah, right now, man, this shit can't wait. Trust me. Okay, thank you. Seriously. I scrambled away from the window as he returned to the kitchen. He gave me a look like he knew fully well I'd been eavesdropping. Andy's on the way. What is he gonna do? He sighed, stuffing his cell phone in his pocket. I don't know. Maybe he's heard about something like this happening before, in one of his books or podcasts or whatever. I'm scared, Dad. He nodded. You'd be crazy not to be. Now come on. We gotta find some clothes. What for? Shit. I ain't letting that nut job see your mom in her birthday suit. She'd never forgive me. Dragging 3 corpses out of a grave proved to be more difficult than either of us anticipated. You were, of course, the easiest. Dad was able to pick you up without my help and carry you to the patio. I trailed behind with his phone flashlight app helping guide the path. He set your body down on the concrete and went off to fetch the hose from the other side of the house, leaving me about a half a minute to stand over your corpse without any supervision. I didn't know what to expect to feel. I stared at my own naked body in the mirror plenty of times, but this was different. It felt less like I was looking at myself and more like I was looking at someone else. You weren't a reflection in the mirror. With the reflection, there was some comfort in knowing that if I moved, then so would the reflection. It wasn't like that with you. If I moved, you wouldn't do a single thing. You were dead. And as far as I knew, I was very much alive. So what the hell were you? To be honest, I still haven't quite figured that out. Maybe one day you'll tell me. I ain't counting on it, though. Someone else maybe wasn't the best way to describe you either. Never once did I view you as a stranger. Sometimes, after spending a long day playing outside, later in the night a person might discover a mysterious bruise somewhere on their flesh and have no memory of how it might have been obtained. Yet, there's no question about whether or not the bruise was a part of them now, albeit temporarily. That's similar to how I was feeling while standing above you. The where did you come from question was prominent in my mind, but at the same time, I'd already arrived at a bizarre peace with your existence, somehow understanding you were always meant to be here, except I doubted your presence would be as brief as a bruise. Dad returned with the hose and sprayed the dirt off your corpse. After the front side was mostly clean, I helped roll you over so Dad could spray your backside. I expected your flesh to feel cold. That's what movies said about dead bodies. They were always cold. But you were warm. Maybe the earth naturally heated you in your garden grave. I don't know. After most of the dirt was gone, Dad carried you into the living room where we'd already laid out 3 sets of clothes. I usually didn't keep any extra clothes at this house anymore, so it was fortunate on my part that I'd packed enough to last several days. Otherwise, I don't know what we would have dressed you in. Although Dad had been able to bring you inside without any help, he found a greater struggle when it came to getting you dressed. I had to hold up your arms and wrestle them into a blue Bart Simpson t-shirt that had "Don't Have a Cow, Man" printed along the front of it. Once it had been one of my favorite shirts. When it slid onto your body, I knew I would never have the courage to wear it again. Yet I felt a strange calmness about it. Seeing the shirt on you wasn't the same as giving it to another person. I didn't feel as if I'd lost the shirt. Instead, it was like I was extending the ownership to another part of me. I just realized even now, you have the same shirt on. For some reason, neither of us had ever thought to change your clothes after the night we removed you from the garden. I'm sorry about that. I hope you don't mind too much. If it's any consolation, I doubt I'll ever get to change my clothes again either. Not now. After we dressed you in my extra basketball shorts and a "Don't Have a Cow, Man" t-shirt, we went outside and fetched Mom's corpse. Both of us hesitated over the garden grave before leaning down. I don't know what was going through Dad's mind as we looked at her body, and I don't know what was going through mine either. If I did know, I probably wouldn't tell you anyway. Aside from occasional late-night private browser searches on my iPad, she was the only other naked woman I'd ever seen. Certainly the only one not digitized on a screen. Everybody sees their mom naked when they're younger, usually at an age where we don't remember much about it. Eventually, there comes a time when that's no longer considered appropriate. I don't know what age exactly you aren't supposed to see your mom naked anymore, but I have a pretty good feeling 13 is well past the cutoff date. She didn't look dead. That was the thing. None of y'all looked dead. Not yet, at least. Not in that perfect moment before we took you out of the garden grave and set in motion the things that were to come. I don't know what I assumed a dead person would look like, but certainly not like what we found in the backyard. You guys looked alive. At the very least asleep, but there was no way you were alive. Not after being buried for who knows how long. Alive isn't the right way to describe it either. Subtract you and the other 2 bodies' likenesses, and there would have been something undeniably off. Even when regular human beings are asleep, they are not perfectly still, and y'all, down in that garden grave, might as well have been statues. The moon was out by then, and the pale flesh of Mom's corpse glowed against it. Her body reminded me of a dropped item you could retrieve in a video game, something like Minecraft or whatever. Her outline was highlighted in the darkness, as if to ensure we didn't overlook her. Her eyes were closed. So was her mouth. I couldn't stop staring at the areas on her no boy is ever supposed to stare at on their mother. Her breasts possessed a terrifying magnetism to them. I wanted to cry. Suddenly, it seemed like a bad idea to remove her. She looked so content in the hole, as if she'd been born to live there. Disturbing her from this bizarre death slumber felt blasphemous. "Dad, You get her feet," Dad said, and the decision was made. He grabbed her by each wrist, and I wrapped my arms around her ankles. Together, we lifted the corpse of my mother out of the hole. Dad didn't have much of an issue on his end, but I struggled. Bush and plant debris littered most of our backyard, so on top of carrying a dead body, we also had to maneuver around various objects impossible to see in the darkness. At one point, I tripped over an unearthed stump of a Texas sage and nearly dropped her, but somehow managed to maintain my balance. My grip tightened around her legs, pressing down against her warm skin. Then I got paranoid I was hurting her and loosened my fingers. I knew she was dead, but That didn't stop me from caring about her. We laid her dead body out along the concrete, and Dad hosed off the dirt, and we brought her inside. He couldn't find any of Mom's clothes from when we used to live here. Instead, he slipped on a black San Antonio Spurs jersey over her. Duncan, number 21, my dad's favorite. He didn't need my help this time, thankfully. I couldn't bear to touch her again. The sweatpants he gave her were too big, but it wasn't like there would be much walking around in her future. I desperately wanted to call and hear her voice again. I knew Dad already checked up, but I needed some kind of personal reassurance that whatever this was in our living room, it wasn't my mom. At least not the mom I knew and loved. Yet, looking at the corpse on Dad's couch, I couldn't help but feel love for her. It did not take long for me to start thinking of her as Mom, too. My brain was scrambled. It couldn't comprehend anything it was processing. In any case, I did not call her. I knew Dad would tell me no, that if we both called in the same night to check up, it would seem suspicious. Although I wasn't so sure it would be a bad idea to update her on what was going on here. Maybe she would have a better understanding of the situation and know how to deal with it. In a battle of intelligence between my mom and Dad, the winner would have been unquestionable. But I also understood why Dad wanted to hide it. This was not a normal discovery we had made. Look at how both of us had cried above the hole, unable to understand what we were witnessing. Obviously, we didn't want my mom to experience a similar emotional wreckage, not unless it became absolutely critical to involve her, and even then, maybe we could avoid it. Okay, Dad said, twisting her spine sideways in an attempt to crack it. Let's go get the last one. He paused while talking, interrupted himself, but I know what he was originally going to say. Me. Let's go get me. Unsurprisingly, he was the heaviest of the bunch. We couldn't lift him for long and settled on dragging the body through the backyard. I tried not to stare at his penis as it flopped against his inner thighs, but I don't think there's much point in hiding these kind of things from you. You wanted the story, the whole story, and this is part of it. In the beginning, we dragged the three of you out of the garden, and it was messy and ugly, and by the time we had everybody inside and dressed, we were exhausted as hell, yet in no way prepared to sleep anytime soon. How does a person sleep during such ghoulish circumstances? The idea sounded ridiculous. Dad dressed his dead self in another pair of sweatpants, and that was it. No shirt? I asked. He paused, looking over his corpse's exposed gut and sagging breasts, and frowned. Nah, fuck it. The three of you were propped up, side by side on the couch together. Y'all just about looked like a regular family. If we'd taken a photo to preserve the memory, I bet we could have fooled plenty of folks into thinking you were alive. Sleepy, maybe, but alive. Despite knowing Andy was on the way, we still screamed when the door knocked. Silence had percolated so long between us in the aftermath of dressing our corpses that for a second it was like we'd forgotten the concept of noise entirely. What was that? I whispered, jumping so hard I nearly spilled my glass of water. Dad widened his eyes, mouth agape, presenting a similar feeling of fear and confusion. Then, slowly, his face relaxed. It's gotta be Andy. Who else? The police? I said, an immense wave of guilt washing over me, like we'd committed some kind of crime by removing the bodies, like we were responsible for you being there in the first place, like we had done something wrong. Dad froze at my suggestion, giving me a paranoid look like I'd read his mind. He waved me off and said, "What business would they have here, huh?" and took off for the living room without waiting on my response, which was a relief because I don't think he would have particularly cared much for what I had to say. I could smell the liquor as soon as Dad opened the door. Dad grimaced and flinched away, then said, "Jesus, how much have you had tonight?" Andy laughed, feigning offense. It's every American's right to drink within the confines of his own home, ain't it? Andy's black and white heeler comrade slipped in through the door without waiting for an invitation. I knelt and braced myself for her embrace. Comrade loved attention, especially attention from me. While I didn't care much for Andy, one perk of his presence was his dog, who accompanied him wherever he went, usually sans leash. Comrade headed for my open arms, big dumb smile across her face, then abruptly changed course and went for someone else. You. She went for you. You and not me. This was probably the first time I found myself feeling jealous of you. She stood on her hind legs against the couch and started sniffing your lap, curious about what new oddity had been introduced to our house since her last visit. Andy took Comrade's lead and stepped past Dad, despite Dad holding his hand up to stop him. Now, wait a second, he tried saying, not to much success. Wait a second, nothing, Andy belched. You call and drag me out of my drinking chair. I ain't waiting no goddamn anything. Andy made it to the center of the living room and stopped, cocking his head the way people do when they've stepped in dog shit, and only first realized it once the scent hits their nose. Only you and the other two bodies, you didn't have a smell. At least not yet. But believe me, it would come, and when it did, it would never leave again. Even now. It's still here, isn't it? Slowly, enough time for several Mississippis to pass, he turned toward the couch, toward the corpse family. A glacier could have melted before he finally said something. Dad and I stood on opposite sides of him, staring, waiting, hoping for some semblance of confirmation on our sanity. He said after a while. Now what's this shit right here? Dad cleared his throat. Well, man, that's what I wanted your opinion on. Andy chuckled, taking turns glancing at living Dad and dead Dad. My opinion? Shit. My opinion is I ain't had nowhere near enough to drink. Dad tried bringing him into the kitchen so he could explain things, but Andy refused to take his eyes off you guys. Same with Comrade. She seemed to love you far greater than she ever loved me. That's the thing with the dead, I've learned. They will always be more important than the living. The dead have accomplished something that every living person is terrified of facing. They've done the impossible. They've died. These are cool as shit, Andy said. How'd you make them? Or was it a special order kind of thing? He messed around with his ponytail sticking out through his black baseball cap. On the front of the hat, in large white text, followed by a single period, it read, Obey. I didn't make these, Dad said. You know, Andy said, Dan, as in our coworker, Dan, he once tried going through one of these specialty websites. I ever tell you about that? Funny as shit. Evidently, there's this website. It can mold a fleshlight out of just about anything. He stopped and glanced over at me. You know what a fleshlight is, right? I said. Come on, man, Dad said. You're how old? He asked me. I assume you've started jerking off, right? I said again. He nodded. Yeah, you've been jerking off. I can tell by your face. Andy, Dad said. What? Look how red his cheeks just got. Face the facts, buddy. Your son jerks off. He laughed and returned his attention toward me. Anyway, a fleshlight is just a kind of tool you can stick your pecker in. Buy them at any pedestrian sex shop. Maybe ask your dad to go in for you, though. Sex shops, they don't take too kindly to kids. Most of them, anyhow. Oh, I said. Oh, okay. Remind me again why you're teaching Dylan about fleshlights, Dad said. Because what I'm about to say about Dan wouldn't have made any sense without the right context already in place. What about Dan? Well, he found out by one of those websites, like I was saying, and he gets the bright idea that maybe they can make a fleshlight out of his wife's ass, which, I mean, it ain't a bad idea. You seen Dan's wife, right? Shit. If I had an ass like that, I'd never stop touching it. I don't care how weird it'd look. Andy! Dad tried cutting him off again, but it was no use. Once Andy got started on one of his anecdotes, there was no stopping him until he was finished. The situation didn't matter. Not even if there were 3 dead bodies coexisting in the room. With Andy, all you guys seemed to do was increase the size of his audience. Anyway, Andy said, the thing with this website is, in order for them to even get to work, first they need what do you call it? A mold encasing of the object in question. And they're not located anywhere near Texas, so you gotta, mail the shit in, right? Of course, Dan doesn't want his wife to know about any of this weird pervy shit. This has gotta be his own secret little plaything. So what does this fucking lunatic do? He waits until she's sound asleep. Then, very carefully, he pulls down their blanket and somehow undresses her and, some kind of motherfucking ass ninja, starts applying the mold shit, hoping like hell she don't wake up. But of course, she wakes up. That shit is cold as fuck. Starts freaking out, screaming. I mean, hell, it's the middle of the goddamn night. How do you think you'd react? You ever had something cold and wet suddenly touch your flesh while you're sleeping? She pissed the bed. Of course she pissed the bed. Completely destroyed those goddamn sheets. Dan tried explaining himself, but that only made things worse. I hear they're getting a divorce, which is a bummer, but those kind of things are sometimes inevitable, as you well know. Anyway, what company did y'all use for these things? Looking at my dad, it was clear he already deeply regretted getting Andy involved in our mess. We found them, he said, doing a terrible job of subduing his impatience. Found them, Andy said. What are you talking about? In the backyard, I whispered, and they both swiveled their heads toward me, as if they'd forgotten I was in the room. The backyard? Andy echoed, then looked at my dad for confirmation, but he was too dumbstruck to respond, so I did it for him. We were digging up Mom's old garden, and they were there, in the ground. Despite the obvious horror of the situation, I felt weirdly cool about getting to explain to someone else what was going on. Almost like an adult. Bullshit, was all Andy said. Dad nodded. I think someone's trying to pull something on us. What do you mean? Someone like who? He thought it over and shrugged. I don't know. Some kind of prankster dickhead with nothing better to do. For what reason, though? Andy asked. And Dad threw his arms up at a loss. For the purpose of being a piece of shit. How do I know? You really found them in the ground? That's what he said, ain't it? Dad said, referring to me, including me as an equal, another puzzled investigator assigned to the impossible corpse mystery. How deep? Andy asked, scratching the trailer trash stubble across his chin. Deeper than the plants, I'll tell you that. Andy had a half smirk across his face, like he hadn't stopped suspecting we were the ones playing a prank on him, which I suppose was fair. These weren't exactly the most ordinary of circumstances. Even Dad and I hadn't fully accepted this new reality yet. Hesitating, Andy joined Comrade over by the couch and reached towards my mother's corpse. He softly caressed her cheek, letting out a subtle gasp, then touched the side of her neck, checking for a pulse. Had Dad already done that on your bodies? I didn't think so. How sure we were that y'all were definitely dead, right? Why wouldn't we assume, though, buried in the ground like that? What else could you have been? The way Andy jumped, however, pretty much cemented our assumptions. He wouldn't have reacted like that to someone who was alive, or to some Halloween trickery. People were displayed out along our couch. Real people. Dead people. "Comrade," Andy said, tone serious. "Get down, now." She ignored her master's commands and continued exploring your sense. I hoped you were enjoying yourself. What I would have given right then to switch positions with you, to feel the unconditional love of a great dog. "Comrade, come on, get." Andy grabbed her chain collar and pulled her off your lap. No dog has ever liked me with such enthusiasm, with such intensity. I couldn't believe it. Andy pointed at the three of you like he was making accusations. What is this? God damn it! What is this?" "You think they're real?" Dad asked, and from the sound of his voice, I couldn't decide what answer he might have been hoping to receive. "If they ain't, someone sure as shit sunk a hell of a lot of cash in them." He took a good look at Mom's corpse again, then started inspecting you and dead Dad, once in a while glancing at me and living Dad, comparing us. "What are you doing?" Dad said. "Wait a second," Andy said, shaking his head, pointing at dead Mom. "Where's Lori, huh? Where'd she go in all of this?" Dad tried to respond, but instead backpedaled, started trembling. Andy matched his retreat with a step forward. "There's two of both of you, but only one of her. Where's the other Lori? What's going on here? What are you trying to say? What did you do to her? What did I do to who? Lori? What are you talking about? Where is she? She's in Corpus with Miguel, you dick brain. Fuck you for thinking otherwise." Andy kept checking you and Dad's corpse, searching for some missed flaw or giveaway, confessing that you weren't the same as Mom's body. And he turned and stared at me. Really stared. I was standing in the same spot across the living room, hadn't moved or nothing, waiting to see how this was all gonna play out. "Is there anything you want to tell me, Dylan?" he said. "Anything your daddy might be neglecting to share?" "Dude, what the fuck?" Dad said. Andy ignored him, kept his attention trained on me. "Would you prefer you and I step outside and have ourselves a little chat, just the two of us?" I shook my head. "My mom's on vacation. We found them outside," I said, pointing directly at you. "All three of them." Another pause from Andy, going over my words in his head like he was swigging around mouthwash. Then he spun back to Dad. "Why did you call me about this?" Dad shrugged. "I figured if anybody might have some inclination about what's going on here, it'd be you." "You haven't talked to me in about a year, man. All of a sudden we're friends again?" Dad sighed, rubbing his temple. "We don't need to go into that right now." "Who says you get to decide what we get into when? An hour ago, I was home getting a good buzz on. Now you've dragged me over here into some fucking... What the hell is all this anyway? What the hell is going on? I mean, what the fuck?" He marched over to dead Dad and slapped his pale shoulder. "This is you!" Then he gestured at living Dad. "And that's also you! How the fuck is that fair?" "You telling me you've never read or heard about something like this happening before?" Dad asked. "I mean," Andy took a deep breath, "the only secrets from our government we even know about are because people got sloppy somewhere. The amount of shit nobody knows that they've managed to keep hidden, that's where shit's gonna get fucking weird. Wouldn't surprise me in the least if some perverted corpse doppelganger conspiracy was floating around somewhere among the files." "So you think this might have something to do with the government?" Andy chuckled. "Shit, partner. How many times I gotta say it? It's always the government, even when it ain't." I didn't know what he meant by that, and judging by Dad's facial expression, he didn't know either. "Have you called anybody else about this?" Andy said. "I know you ain't dumb enough to have gotten the cops involved, right?" "Of course not," Dad said, offended. "What do you take me for?" "I gotta ask, don't I? We don't talk in how long? Who knows which ways you changed?" It hadn't been that long, for Christ's sake, and besides, we're Facebook friends, ain't we? So what? I'm also Facebook friends with my cousin's husband, Greg, and I fucking hate that guy. He's such an asshole. Always ever posting about The Office. Yeah, Greg, we already know it's good. Pick a new show, you piece of shit. What I'm saying is you act like I'm the one dating your ex-wife. No, but you're still friends with the son of a bitch dating her, though. It was almost humorous how much petty bickering the two of them were doing while standing in the same room with 3 corpses. Neither possessed the slightest idea of how to handle the matter at hand, so they'd sought momentary refuge opening old wounds. Eventually, thankfully, they abandoned these past grudges and returned to the couch. They stood over the bodies real serious while I rubbed the top of Comrade's head. She'd finally come to me. Then Andy giggled. "The hell's so funny?" Dad said. Andy leaned over dead Dad and gave one of his hairy breasts a little jiggle. "Your man boobs are hilarious." I tried not to also laugh and failed. Dad noticed my betrayal. The look on his face was heartbreaking. I wanted to crawl out into our backyard garden grave and hide, disappear within the obscurity of dirt. "Don't touch that," Dad said to him, which only made Andy give the nipple a tougher tug. "Why?" Andy said. "Not like you could feel it or anything." He stopped and released my dead father's breasts, then turned to us. "Wait, can you?" "Can I what?" "Maybe it's like some sort of voodoo doll or some shit. Whatever I do to this body, you also feel." "I don't think that's quite how this works." "Works? Like you know how this works. As I recall, you're the one who called me." He slapped dead Dad across the face, and his body slightly adjusted before settling on the couch. "Hey!" Dad shouted. Andy spun around, excited. "Did you feel that?" "No, I already told you I—" Andy didn't wait for Dad to finish his response. He bounced over to you and backhanded your cheek. Your head jerked to the side. For a second, I believed that I'd felt the slap land on my own cheek, but I suspect it was merely the shock of witnessing my face get assaulted from an outsider's point of view. "Hey!" Dad shouted. "Don't hit my son!" Andy demonstrated an aha gesture. "So you admit it?" "Admit what?" "That he's your son," Andy said, talking about you, not me. "I don't know what he is yet, but I reckon you shouldn't go around slapping kids, dead or alive or something else." "Something else like what?" I asked, reminding them again that I was in the room. "I don't know," Dad said. "Ain't that what we're here trying to figure out?" "Exactly," Andy said, and proceeded to slap you across the face again. "God damn it," Dad shouted. "Stop doing that." Andy laughed and backed away, hands up in surrender. Comrade tried charging forward and taking her master's place in front of your lap, but I restrained her out of protection of your own well-being or my own selfishness. I couldn't tell which. Maybe the two feelings could coexist side by side. It didn't matter much anyway. Nobody else was paying attention to me by then. You and the rest of your grotesque corpse family had managed to successfully commandeer the spotlight, and you hadn't even done anything. Sitting there on the couch, being dead. Y'all just about made me sick. We had to take a break from the dead bodies for a while. It was past midnight, but that didn't stop Dad from brewing a new pot of coffee. Andy preferred booze. Somehow Dad convinced him caffeine would be a more appropriate beverage choice for the kind of situation we all found ourselves in. Reluctantly, he agreed, but promised to act real grumpy about the whole thing, which we had already expected anyway. We sat around the kitchen table, drinking coffee, each silently daring the others to speak first. Well, they were drinking coffee. I had a glass of ice water, although I'd originally requested another helping of chocolate milk. Dad told me no way, that too much dairy could destroy my stomach. "Imagine how your mom would react," he'd said, as if she wouldn't have a much bigger fish to worry about than my stomach being upset. With one hand, I played around with my glass of water, and with the other, I continued gripping Comrade's collar. She was determined to break free and love on you. You were suddenly her favorite person, and I would have been perfectly content if I never saw you again. Okay, Andy said, tapping his fingers along the brim of his Buc-ee's coffee mug. If we're going to stop messing around and get to the bottom of this, we best start strategizing. Why would they be here? Dad said, running his hands through his hair. Where could they have come from? I shivered and folded my arms across my chest. It had quite suddenly gotten unbearably cold in this kitchen. Comrade made a subtle growl as I dragged her closer to my lap. Are they really us? Andy smacked his lips together. Might be a little premature to make a conclusion like that, but hell, at this point, anything's a possibility. Are you sure they're real? Dad asked. Andy shook his head. I ain't sure any goddamn thing. He drummed the table for a second, exhaling dramatically. You ever see a dead body before? No, of course not. What do you mean, of course not? People die every day. Hell, man, since I got here tonight, probably 1,000 poor sons of bitches have dropped dead all around the world, and even that's a wee bit of an underestimation. What? I said, voice cracking. Is that true? Andy nodded, proud of educating me about something. Over 150,000 people die every day. That's a fucking fact. Most from heart disease bullshit, yeah, but you also got plenty of malaria cases, too. Parkinson's disease, road injuries, hippo attacks. Even heat gets its share of kills in per day, and I'm not talking about the movie, bucko. What movie? I asked, and Andy grimaced. That still doesn't mean I've seen a dead body before, Dad said. Wait, have you? Not in person, at least, but pics, videos. You bet your ass I seen videos, fella. I've seen videos that'll make your asshole leap out of your throat. What does that even mean? Andy thought it over, then shrugged. I don't know, but it sounded cool, didn't it? Neither of us responded, so he wiped his face and continued. The point is, no, I ain't ever seen one up close before, but out of the three of us here, I absolutely got the most experience, which is why you called me up in the first place, despite ghosting me for however many fucking months and... Ghosting? Dad said. Yeah, what about it? People say it. I've heard them. What are you talking about? Andy sighed and begged me to rescue him. Dylan, you want to tell your obsolete father what ghosting means? I don't know what it means either, I admitted. Holy hell, he said. It's like talking to a family of Neanderthals or something. His face distorted after that last remark. A real light bulb going off in your head epiphany. Wait a second. For what? Dad said, still annoyed about not knowing what ghosting meant. That ain't such a far-fetched idea, is it? Andy stood from the table and started pacing around the kitchen, which only succeeded in exciting the dog. Her collar dug into my fingers as I tightened my grip. What idea? Dad said. Neanderthals. Ain't you listening to a word I've been saying? Goddamn cavemen, baby. Motherfucking Fred Flintstone and Bam Bam and shit. You think those bodies out there are cavemen? Dad asked the question like he couldn't tell if Andy was screwing with them or not. But of course, Andy was being serious. It wasn't that crazy of an idea. At least no crazier than anything else we'd come up with tonight, which hadn't accounted for much. Unless you'd recently learned about Neanderthals in the previous school year, like I had. No, I said, testing the volume of my voice, trying to match the other two men. It can't be Neanderthals. Andy looked at me with pure outrage. And why the hell not? Neanderthals, they don't look like how we look. I hugged my chest again, shivering. They're smaller. Their bones aren't as evolved. Comrade wrestled out of my grip and took off for the living room. Nobody but me seemed to notice or care. He raises a valid point, Dad said. And besides, them being cavemen, that don't explain anything. Why would they look exactly like us? And what kind of goddamn insane coincidence would land them in our backyard? He also wrapped his arms around himself and glanced around the kitchen, perhaps searching for the cause of the room's sudden temperature shift. God damn, Dylan, did you fuck around with the AC again? You know how expensive that can get. I shook my head and told him I hadn't touched it. Andy laughed, gave us another look like we were pulling something on him. What are you guys talking about? You really that cold? What? Dad said. You ain't? It's hot as balls in this house. It was then that I noticed the beads of sweat dripping down Andy's face. You've also been drinking tonight, Dad said, calm in my unannounced paranoia. He got up and approached the thermostat on the wall between the kitchen and the living room, leaned forward and squinted for a couple seconds, then said, What the hell? What? Andy and I said in unison. Says it's 79 in the house. That feels about right, Andy said, taking off his obey cap and rubbing his sweaty hair. I told you. Hot as balls. Damn contraption must be busted or something, Dad said under his breath, then sat at the table. He looked utterly exhausted, and I felt about the same. Could you blame us? We'd both gotten up super early that morning. Let me remind you, this was the same day Dad barged over to Mom's and threw a fit about our Corpus Christi trip. So much had happened since then, and neither of us had so much as napped. No wonder we were freezing. You guys ever hear about what happened to Paul McCartney? Like, what really happened? Andy asked us. Supposedly, back in the 60s, he died in a car crash. Like, it was rough. Dude got fucking decapitated and everything. This was right before Sgt. Pepper. But instead of reporting his death to the public, he was simply replaced with a look-alike. A look-alike? Dad said. Yeah, like in the winner of a legitimate look-alike contest. People auditioned. That cannot be true. Who's Paul McCartney? I asked. Just some music asshole, Andy said. Why wouldn't they report it? Dad asked. That doesn't make any sense. Because, man, don't you get how big they were back then? The whole fucking stupid country would have died from grief, so they replaced him. Even bragged about it in their goddamn lyrics. Dude, go listen to the end of Strawberry Fields Forever and it'll blow your mind. Lennon straight up admits to burying Paul. Cranberry sauce, my ass. What does this have to do with anything? What do you mean? What does it have to do with... Max, buddy, in case you ain't noticed, this house is crawling with lookalikes. Yeah, but come on. These weren't winners of a lookalike contest. Well, they sure as fuck ain't losers of a lookalike contest either, Andy said, glancing at the doorway leading into the living room. Have y'all considered time travel yet? Time travel? He shrugged. Sure, why not? This could definitely be time travel, right? But they look like they're the same ages as we are now, Dad said. Wouldn't they be older looking if they came from the future? Unless they traveled from another dimension, like a bizarro version of our own reality. How do we figure out if something like that happened? I guess you'd have to ask them. Oh, okay, Dad said. I'll take that idea under consideration, thanks. You know, Andy said, the thing I don't get is if they're real bodies and they're actually dead, then how come they ain't, like all rotten and shit? They might as well be in-store displays. No corpse has ever been more pristine than the three y'all got in that other room. So then they're not real? Dad said, a manic mixture of relief and disappointment in his tone. I didn't say that, now did I? Andy smacked his lips, thinking things over. Maybe their lack of wear and tear just, implies they only recently died. That their deaths, it ain't so much ancient history, but breaking news. Dad yawned and rubbed his eyes. What are you suggesting? I think we gotta cut one of them open. See what's going on inside, if they got real organs or what. What else would be in there? I asked, not wanting to hear his answer, but I got it anyway. Who knows? If they ain't human, real human, then it could be anything beyond the flesh, right? Robot shit like gears and wires, weird alien tentacle crap. We haven't even begun to speculate aliens, have we? Shit, they could definitely be aliens. Aliens? I said, rubbing my cold cheeks and trying to warm them. Andy nodded. Aliens, yeah, for sure. Or maybe we open one of them up and find, hell, I don't know, nothing. Maybe they're just hollow inside, or a bunch of, what's that shit you call, you find it in the walls? Fiberglass insulation. What would that mean? No clue, but it could be there. We won't know shit until we take a peek, right? So why don't we go take a peek? He got up and started rifling through the kitchen drawers. What are you doing? Dad asked. He stood, but instead of joining Andy by the kitchen sink, he ventured over to a coat rack and tossed on a hoodie. Trying to find something sharp enough to cut through flesh. I think maybe we need to talk about this a little more. Andy pulled out a large butcher's knife and grinned at Dad. What's left there to talk about? We can speculate all goddamn night and it ain't gonna get us any closer to solving this mystery. Action is what's required. Lights, camera, action, baby, action. He took off for the living room. Dad followed, stuffing his hands in his jacket pockets. I surveyed the coat rack and realized I no longer had a jacket here. All of my cold weather clothes were at Mom's house. What reason would I have needed to bring a jacket this weekend? It was the middle of July in Texas. Few places on this earth reached hotter temperatures than a Texas summer. A cold night like tonight usually didn't happen until closer to November. Dad was right. Something must have been broken on our thermostat. There was an old denim jacket on the rack underneath several other coats, something Dad used to wear when he was younger and thinner. It was big on me, but small enough to not look too cartoonish. I slipped it on and raced into the living room, hoping I hadn't missed anything yet. Moving fast proved to be surprisingly difficult. My shins ached as if I'd recently exercised, but thinking about it further, I had recently exercised. Digging up an old garden wasn't exactly a walk in the park. It had been tough. And then we transported 3 heavy corpses. I wondered how other kids in my class were spending their summer vacation. Dad and Andy were standing in front of the couch trying to decide which one of you they'd cut open. Comrade had given up trying to sniff you and had instead curled up across your lap and had already fallen into a peaceful sleep. I didn't understand why she'd chosen you when you weren't even trying to pet her. I would have petted her all night and told her what a good girl she was, but she didn't care. She didn't want me. She only wanted you. So be it. You could have her then. Wasn't like she was my dog anyway. No way in hell you're touching the boy, Dad said. Agreed, Andy said. Even if he's dead, I'm sure the punishment's much more severe when it comes to desecrating a child compared to a full-grown adult. Dad gestured to Mom's body. Her. No way, Andy said. Why not? Because she's the only one who ain't here. Exactly. Meaning she's the only one I'm not sure is anywhere else. Oh, come on, Eileen. I did not kill my ex-wife. Andy ignored Dad's last comment and sidestepped in front of dead Dad's body. Besides, this one already has his shirt off. Dad sighed, defeated. Only a little cut. Why? Andy asked, snickering. You afraid it's gonna hurt? I don't know what to expect, do you? Andy thought about it, then shrugged and leaned forward, probably trying to determine the best spot of skin to puncture. Viewing this inspection from across the living room, I realized a change had occurred on the three bodies. Your flesh had paled significantly since the last time we were in here. You'd lost all the pinkish pigmentation found on most white people, at least the ones in my family. They look different, I said. My lips were freezing and made the act of talking incredibly annoying, but a new detail like this couldn't go unannounced. "What are you talking about?" Andy said, glancing over his shoulder at me, one hand gripping our butcher's knife. "No," Dad said. "He's right. Look at their coloring." He picked up Mom's arm, then dropped it. "Holy shit, they're cold." Confused, Andy grabbed dead Dad's arm. "Well, they're dead. Of course they're cold. But they weren't cold earlier," Dad said. "They were warm, maybe a little hot." "Further proves my theory that they only recently died," Andy said. "And besides, have you looked at yourself lately? When was the last time you got any sun?" "What are you talking about?" Dad said. "I spent all goddamn day outside." But Andy wasn't joking. Dad's flesh was about as pale as his deceased counterpart. Suddenly nervous, I rolled up one of the sleeves on Dad's denim jacket, then glanced down at my forearm and confirmed my suspicions. I let the sleeve fall back without showing anybody. If they wanted to see how pale I'd gotten, I'm sure all they had to do was take a good look at my face. "Must be the AC," Dad said, sounding like he was trying to convince himself more than anybody else. "I'm telling you, something broke in it. Lowered the temp until it froze over or something. You weren't so boozed up, you'd feel exactly what I'm talking about." Andy shook his head. "Hot as balls." "Then explain why both me and Dylan can feel it." "I don't know," Andy said. "Maybe it's got something to do with the fact that you two also got a pair of zombie twins in the house with you. Take a look around, partner. When it comes to my glorious likeness, I'm one of a kind." He winked and made a little kissy face. "We need to at least see if these guys can bleed." "Do corpses bleed?" Dad asked, which was a question I'd never considered in my brief life. "Good question," Andy said, lifting dead Dad's arm. "Let's find out." He pressed the blade into the pale flesh, then waited for a second. Nothing happened. He dug it in slightly deeper, and a thin line of blood emerged from the hole. It did not come out in a steady stream like how people bled in movies, but instead like teardrops dripping from a person's eye sockets, like the wound was crying. Andy let go of dead Dad's arm and stepped back. "All right, so we know they can bleed." How come there's only a little bit?" I asked. "His heart is no longer functioning, if it ever even was functioning," Andy said. "Meaning there's nothing working the pumps." "Pumps?" "That's right. What we're seeing, I think, is the leftovers. Like when you take a piss and give your pecker a good shake, but still manage to spill a little drippage on your boxers." "You know a lot about this stuff," Dad said, rubbing his jaw and wincing. Andy belched. "I mean, I know some shit, but I'm mostly making some logical guesses here." "Do you think we should still cut one of them open? Like all the way open?" "Yeah, but maybe in the morning. I'm beat." Dad yawned. "You can stay here if you want. Save you a drive." "Will they be okay?" I asked, realizing how tight my jaw had gotten. Forming words proved far more painful than I could have ever anticipated. "Are we just gonna leave them here until morning?" "Well, we sure as hell ain't gonna drag them back to the garden," Dad said. He tried to crack his neck and moaned. I could relate, as my neck was also feeling stiff. I never wanted to work outside again after today. Physical labor had destroyed us. In the end, we decided to throw a sheet over you and the other two bodies. If we were freezing, who knew how cold you guys must have been this whole time? Andy let Comrade outside to pee, and she wasted zero time in returning to the couch, this time curling up on the carpet next to your feet. I considered grabbing her collar and dragging her down the hallway to my room, but it was no use trying to force someone to love you. Dad had learned that the hard way with Mom. Once someone decided they were done with you, there was no changing their mind about it. The first time I found out about death, really understood the finality of it, I don't know how old I was. Mom and Dad were still together. I don't know where they were, though. Maybe inside. Not me. I was out on the front yard playing golf. Playing golf like how a little kid plays golf. I owned a plastic red golf club and several plastic red balls, and sometimes I would slap them around the front yard. I wasn't strong enough to achieve much distance with my swings, so there was never any danger of accidentally hitting passing traffic or a neighbor's window. Much like the backyard, we also had plenty of bushes in the front of our house. These bushes were taller and more spread out, giving a boy my size plenty of room to explore. On the day in question, I remember hitting one of my balls into these bushes. From across the yard, I watched the leaves swallow its cratered red plastic and felt an immediate sense of dread at the possibility of never seeing it again. I rushed into the bushes and searched everywhere, and just when I was beginning to surrender to the inevitability of failure, there it was, my ball, half hidden under a fallen leaf, and next to the leaf, something else, a frog, staring up at me, curious about this gigantic creature he'd caught trespassing in his bushes, leaving me to suspect maybe he wasn't real, or he was just a statue or something. But then I noticed the subtle movements in his throat and stomach, the kind of breathing motions universally associated with frogs. We were both looking at each other, as if daring the other to move first. I thought about this day a lot since it happened, I'll tell you that. It's never far from my memory, from my conscience. And despite that, I don't quite understand what made me do what I did. I can't remember, or maybe I refuse to remember what sparked the idea, or how something so violent could have originated in my head to begin with, but it happened, and I can't pretend it didn't. I lifted my plastic golf club and swung. Lightly at first, testing how it'd feel. The frog didn't like this new disturbance. It tried to leap away. That's when things got out of hand. I followed. I swung harder, faster. At some point, I was screaming. The frog died long before I stopped hitting it. In the heat of the moment, I didn't feel bad. I'd never felt greater. Killing that frog had been one of the most exciting moments of my life. Up until we found you in the garden, anyway. The excitement didn't last. Seconds after dropping the club and inspecting the frog's ruptured body, a new feeling consumed me. Guilt. I don't know how to describe guilt. If you've never felt it, then consider yourself lucky. It's like you've taken a big bite out of pure poison, and everything inside of you gets a nasty taste of it. For a while, nothing can bring you joy. The reminder of what you've done wrong looms over like a storm cloud refusing to part, and all you want to do is reverse your actions. You do anything to take it back, but it's too late. There's no undoing what's been done. That's how I felt in those bushes, staring down at the frog I'd murdered. No matter how long I looked at it, nothing changed. I thought for sure maybe it would suddenly get tired of being so still and hop up on its legs and return to its family. But of course that didn't happen. The frog stayed dead. After a while, I didn't know what else to do, so I collected my golf toys and went inside and curled up on the couch and watched TV with my parents until I finally fell asleep. And that night, and the night after, and the night after, I dreamed about frogs and nothing else. I woke up screaming. The previous night, or earlier that morning, depending on how you want to look at things, I remembered collapsing in bed, sore and exhausted. Then I was awake again, this time consumed by agony. In recent years, I'd often woken to a similar sensation. Charley horses, growing pains, whatever. A natural part of getting older. My mama told me. Everybody gets them. I understand that, but this was something different. Never before had I woken up to a Charley horse spasming throughout every inch of my body. Usually, they target one specific area, like my thighs or calves. But not this. Head to toe, nothing but torment. My face ached. The louder I screamed, the worse it hurt, which only resulted in more screaming, followed by more pain. Somewhere in the house, my father was screaming just as loud. I tried to get out of bed and failed. My limbs refused to follow simple directions. Everything was stiff and cold. So freaking cold. I managed to wiggle a couple of inches to the side and nearly passed out from the pain. I tried to scream for help, but nothing I said sounded like real words. It was like an invisible weight. It crushed me against the mattress, and now I was slowly suffocating. My bedroom door swung open. With immense willpower, I turned my head toward the entrance, expecting to find my dad, and instead only seeing Andy. Behind him, down the hallway, Dad hadn't stopped screaming. "Hell's going on in here?" he said, half asleep, half terrified. "Hurts. Everything hurts," I shouted, powering my voice through a raw throat. Andy flipped on my bedroom light and leaned over my bed. His eyes widened the more he looked at me. "Holy shit," was all he said, and backed up against my bookcase, knocking over several old Goosebumps books my parents had bought me years ago at a library discount sale. "What?" I mumbled, lips unbearably heavy. "What?" Andy pointed at me, arm trembling, and stuttered several times before finally forming a coherent sentence. "You look like hell, boy." He took out his cell phone and turned on the camera app, then switched to the frontward lens and turned it toward me so I could take a look at myself. My lips were blue, discolored, freezing. I was freezing, and I was pale, yes, paler than I ever thought could be possible, but also, somehow at the same time, shiny. Like someone had polished my flesh while I was asleep, added a slick sheen to the front of my body. I say the front of my body for a reason. When Andy helped me sit up, I noticed a new feature behind my neck. He nearly dropped me. "What the hell?" he said, pulling back my t-shirt and revealing more of my shoulders. I was left with no choice but to wait while he continued inspecting me and speculate on what could be causing such an animated reaction. "What the fuck? What? I screamed. The way he had me propped up was almost cartoonish. For whatever reason, my limbs refused to bend, including my spine, despite Andy's added assistance. So I couldn't sit up, not how he wanted me to at least. He had to slide me half off the mattress and half on his lap like he was puppeteering a malfunctioning ventriloquist doll. But to see more of my back, he ended up kind of tossing me on the mattress face first and rolling up my shirt. Behind me, all I could hear was him muttering, "Holy shit," and "What the fuck?" over and over. "See," I whispered, every bone in my body aching simultaneously. "Let me see." His camera app made a flashing noise, and he propped the phone in front of my face, showing me a bizarre bluish-purple marbled texture. It took me entirely too long to realize it was a photo of my own back. After that, I started screaming much louder. The pain no longer seemed to matter that much. Dad was experiencing similar issues, we soon discovered. Andy left me in my bedroom to go investigate the other noises of agony emitted through the house, then returned to inform me of the bad news. "Looks like your dad's also fucked up." The pain coursing through me was too great for me to register what he meant. "What's wrong?" I managed to ask. All Andy could do was shrug. "Hell if I know. Both y'all are stiff as hell and white as ghosts. You'd think you two were the ones who was dead." And just like that, Andy stopped talking, and I stopped screaming, and we looked at each other, a new realization digging into our brains. The answer was so obvious it was almost stupid. Andy let out a sigh and lightly kicked his boot against the door frame, then said, "Ah, dang." It took some doing, but Andy dragged the both of us to the living room. Every time one of our limbs were forced into motion, we'd let out another cry. Neither of us could bend any part of our bodies. It was like something had locked us in place and then threw away the key. Andy tried to prop us up on chairs, but the man only had so much energy left in him. He abandoned this objective and settled for laying us on the carpet in the middle of the room. After contemplating, he ran off down the hallway and returned with 2 pillows, which he wedged under our heads. "There," he said, clapping his hands together as if they'd somehow accumulated dust during our transportation. Then he stood above us, waiting for something to happen, and we lay beneath him also waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. Every time I tried to move, another explosion of pain burst through me. Same thing with Dad, only inches away. We were paralyzed, but nothing was numb. We could feel everything. Bodies are strange entities. I've always found the operation of limbs quite mysterious. That somehow, just by thinking about it, I can make my arms and legs do whatever I want. By sending invisible signals from my brain, I can walk forward or backward, or decide to jump or dance or do the splits. Nothing on my body moves unless I tell it to move, and I don't know how I deliver these messages, not fully. It's a low-key form of telekinesis that nobody ever seems to talk about. We all have magic inside of us, and we utilize it every second we're alive, and sometimes when we're dead. It's a subtle magic that we all take for granted until we no longer have it. Like that early Saturday morning, sprawled out on the living room carpet, parallel to my equally paralyzed father. No matter how loud I screamed orders inside my head, my limbs refused to obey. My body had gone on strike, but it didn't seem to have a list on demands. It didn't want anything except to be left alone, which was the one thing I refused to allow it. Andy paced around us in a circle, muttering, Okay, over and over, at a loss for what to do. If Dad and I had been able to speak coherently, I sincerely doubt we would have contributed anything more productive. Last night, before our sudden paralysis, we hadn't known what to do, and now we knew even less. From the corner of my eye, I could detect a sudden motion of white. Andy had pulled the sheet off the couch, exposing you and the other 2 corpses to the living room once again. And although I could not see you with my head facing the ceiling, it was easy enough to tell the 3 of you had also undergone somewhat of a transformation during the middle of the night. Otherwise, Andy wouldn't have said, "Ah, fuck," seconds after uncovering the couch and resumed his frantic pacing. Next to me, Dad kept whisper screaming, "Dill! Dill! Dill!" And I kept whisper screaming back, "What? What? What?" But he only followed my response up with more, "Dill! Dill! Dill!" Andy paused above us, lunacy in his eyes. "Would you 2 shut the fuck up for a second? I'm trying to think here, for crying out loud." Which was exactly what Dad and I were doing. Crying out loud, I mean. We did not quiet down. If anything, we got louder. Andy threw up his hands and told us he couldn't handle this kind of noise, then stomped off to the kitchen. Cabinets opened and closed. Ice shuffled out of the freezer. A liquid poured into a glass. I didn't need Dad to tell me what was already obvious. Andy was making himself a drink with alcohol involved. I also didn't need to ask Andy why to know what he'd say. If I'm going to solve this little mystery, I'm going to need to get good and drunk first. And considering Dad currently couldn't stop him, given that he was, paralyzed, why not give it a try? I don't know how much time passed before he returned. When your body is completely consumed by pain, seconds quickly translate into hours. But he did come back, and when his face reappeared above us, his expression seemed much more confident than the last time we saw him. Okay, he said. So this is a situation, as far as I can see it anyway. Something happened while y'all were sleeping. I don't know what. But now, y'all can't move worth a damn. I can't bend you, which is like, what the hell, right? And those fellas over there, he pointed to the couch, they're in the same boat as y'all, except they're already bent, like in sitting positions, and I can't seem to straighten them out. I try any harder, and I'm afraid of breaking them in half. And your skin, both you two and those corpses, you got that ghost paleness going on. Know what I'm talking about? Watch any movie set in a morgue. That's how pale you guys are, except for your backs. I don't know what's going on there, but both of your backs are this weird bluish purple. The same color as on those corpses, too, but not in the same place as you. They got it like under their thighs and on their feet. The best theory I've been able to come up with is maybe it's because you two were lying on your backs. Those guys have been sitting up all night. I read somewhere once that when a dead body decomposes, gravity collects all the blood in a person and drags it down to the lowest point, which I guess would make sense if you two was dead, which you clearly are not, so what the hell, right? Then he paused, thinking the situation over. The gears were turning in his head about something. He kneeled over Dad for a second, gasped, then maneuvered over me and pressed first his hand over my chest and then his ear, followed by another gasp. "What?" Dad managed to say. Andy replied. "What? God damn it. What?" "Your goddamn hearts ain't beating." "What?" "Your goddamn hearts ain't beating." "Shut up." "It's the truth, motherfucker. Why would I lie about something like that?" He started pacing around us again, fooling with his hat, then stopped and said, "Okay, I need another drink," and took off for the kitchen. More ice cubes fell into a glass, then another helping of liquor. As we waited for him to return, someone else decided to finally join our living room party. Comrade. And this time, much to my shock, she did not want anything to do with you. She went straight to me, like she'd always done before you decided to move into our house. I hoped like hell you were witnessing this. I prayed you felt every ounce of jealousy I'd experienced the previous night. Maybe she detected how much pain I was experiencing and had come to help make everything better. She started sniffing and licking my left arm, which tickled, but in a good way. I tried to laugh, but couldn't remember how to make the sound with my mouth. Then the tickling evolved into something more violent, and I realized much too late that she wasn't only licking my arm. She was biting it, eating it. The scream that emitted from between my lips prompted Andy to come sprinting into the living room. "Comrade!" he shouted. "No! Bad girl! Bad!" He grabbed Comrade's collar and dragged her away from me, and my body jerked to the side. She hadn't released my arm from her mouth. "Comrade!" Andy shouted again. "No! Bad!" More wrestling commenced, and Andy finally got my arm free of his dog's teeth. I found myself feeling grateful that I couldn't look down and see what kind of damage had been inflicted upon me during Comrade's mangling session. It was probably for the best, especially after hearing Andy gasp afterward. "Oh, shit," he said. "I'm sorry, kid. I'm so sorry." Beside us, Dad was losing his mind. He had no idea what was going on, but surely had picked up on the fact that I'd just gone through something a little traumatic. "Let me go lock her up in the bathroom or something," Andy said. "I don't know what the hell her problem is." Footsteps vibrated against the carpet as he dragged Comrade down the hallway. It was amazing how much sound I'd started detecting with my ears so close to the floor. Any little motion could project their own vibration, like my father trying his damnedest to get up and help me. He'd managed to rock his body in subtle movements, but I'd managed to hear him. I interpreted these movements as a good sign, one that implied our paralysis would only be temporary. Andy returned to the living room and apologized again about Comrade's behavior. "But don't worry," he said. "She's not getting out of that bathroom anytime soon. Fucking crazy-ass dog." He checked our hearts again and shook his head. "Y'all shit still ain't beaten. I don't know what to say." "Help," Dad said. "Help how? You want me to call an ambulance or something? I can do that, sure, but I'm using your phone, and the moment I hang up the call, I'm getting the hell out of here." Standing above us, he gestured at the couch, despite the fact that we couldn't turn our heads. "I don't know if any of y'all noticed, but this whole setup here looks suspicious as a motherfucker." "No," Dad croaked out. "Hell," Andy said. "Maybe your hearts are beating. Ain't like I'm some kind of expert. Just because I don't hear shit don't mean anything. Not really. I wish we had one of those listening doohickeys that nurses got, like with the metal headphones and shit. You can hear anything with one of those." He sat in the recliner. I didn't need to see him to know that. The chair always made a distinct sound whenever someone surrendered their weight between the armrests. A little squeak, followed by a prolonged creak as it rocked with its new guest. I could tell by the sound of his voice that Andy was starting to get sleepy again, despite everything going on. It wasn't like he could feel the pain Dad and I were experiencing. Plus, he was drunk again, or at least on the right path. "I know y'all can't talk," Andy was saying, "so I'll go ahead and do the talking for all three of us." Next to me, I swear to God, I heard Dad laugh. If Andy heard him, he chose to ignore it. "Let's say whatever's going on here does involve the government, which, come on, seems pretty fucking likely to me, don't you think? So let's say it is them. That they, what? They're conducting some sort of bizarre experiment on y'all? What happens once we call for an ambulance then?" Several possibilities cross my mind. One, an ambulance never comes. If the government is behind all this shit, then you bet your ass they got wires hooked up on your phone, which means they probably intend on somehow interrupting any 911 calls and impersonating emergency dispatchers through their own phone line. An ambulance might show up, sure, but I sincerely doubt an actual paramedic will be behind the wheel. They might even be dressed in the usual paramedic getup, but so what? You think a government official can't take a trip to Party City, get themselves all kind of cheap disguises? Then what happens? Well, shit, that's the easy part to guess. They load you and the boy and whatever the hell these bodies on the couch are back into one of their fake-ass shit ambulances and transport y'all to some secret facility surrounded by barbed wire fences. And as for me, I'm fucking dead meat is what I am, partner. I'm what you'd call a witness, and when it comes to spooky government conspiracy bullshit, there's no such thing as a witness. At least, not one with a very long lifespan. They'd either kill me right here in the house or pretend like they was simply taking me in for questioning, but I know full well what kind of perverted macabre rodeo they're up there running, and it sure as shit ain't one I intend on stepping into anytime soon, not without putting up one hell of a fight first. Andy paused. Ice rubbed against ice as he took another sip of his drink. Down the hallway, Comrade scratched at the door and whined. She was desperate to continue eating me. But that's assuming the government is keeping tabs on everything going on here tonight. Honestly, I'm surprised they haven't already barged through the front door. You were real smart earlier, Max, how cryptic and shit you were when you spoke to me on the phone. Way to use that smooth brain of yours. But still, you have to imagine if they're going through all the trouble of implanting body double corpses or whatever the fuck this is, they'd have also installed some pretty high-tech security cameras to watch over their property. I feel fairly confident in ruling out cameras. Unless, well, shit, I don't know. Unless this is all part of the experiment. Unless they're sitting back and waiting to see how the three of us react to this weird-ass discovery. Probably up at Randolph right now, watching us through their little security monitors, eating popcorn and jerking each other off. His voice got louder, like he was yelling at the hypothetical cameras. I hear movie theater butter works as a real nice lubricant, you sick, demented fucks. He laughed and drank more of his booze. I guess it was technically Dad's booze, but whatever. Wasn't like Dad was in much of a position to reclaim it. Okay, Andy continued. Let's say this shit ain't the work of Uncle Sam, and it's something completely unrelated. When the ambulance arrives and takes the briefest of assessments of this situation, who do you think they're gonna call? You think something this strange falls under local jurisdiction? Hell nah. They're ringing up the nearest X-Files, Men in Black motherfuckers they can find and telling them to get their asses over here pronto. And then, once again, you lot end up in a secret bunker to get experimented on for the rest of the time, and I'm tossed in some unmarked grave. Now, there's no way around it. Calling 911, I don't see how it's going to help much. If your hearts are already stopped, then shit. That means you're, what, a couple of zombies? No nurse is going to know how to handle some weird-ass supernatural zombie bullshit. And if your hearts are still beating and I'm just deaf, then fuck it. Why not wait this out a little bit longer? Maybe this issue will somehow resolve itself, right? I mean, hell, sometimes things just work themselves out without any outside interference. You get a scratch, do you rush to the hospital? Or do you apply a little water and soap and wait for it to scab over and heal all on its lonesome? If I could have talked right then, I would have pointed out that this situation required something more significant than a scab. It was probably a good thing I couldn't talk, though, because he would have asked what it required if not a scab, and I have no idea what I would have said. Considering how much everything hurt, I would have most likely suggested death as the only suitable medicine. Put me out of my misery, I would have begged, all the while wondering if death was a possibility at the point. If I was already dead, could I die again? And if so, what the hell would that mean? So, yeah, it was a good thing I couldn't talk. Some thoughts, they're better off unspoken. Andy fell asleep not too long after that. His snores were loud and wet. I found myself at first annoyed listening to him sleep, and then jealous, then quickly back to annoyed. Sleepiness hit me like Comrade scratching at the bathroom door, whining to be let out. And if I was positive, if I could only close my eyes, it would finally find me. But I couldn't close them. At some point during all the commotion, my eyelids had also grown stiff, an action I could hardly believe possible, despite personally experiencing more than enough evidence there on the living room floor. My eyelids were stuck at the top of my eyes, like curtains jammed in a window, refusing to lower no matter how hard I struggled. My eyes became unbearably dry, and I could do nothing except lie on the carpet and let it happen, hoping someone would notice and help me. If only Andy would have snapped awake and used his fingers to pull down my eyelids, I would have never asked for anything again. Cancel all future birthdays and Christmases. This was the only gift I'd ever want. But he remained asleep, his snores dragging on longer and wetter and more disgusting by the minute, and I remained awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I concentrated hard enough whether or not I could trigger hidden telekinetic abilities to collapse the roof on top of all of us. The house did not cave in. In fact, nothing at all happened for several hours. I was awake for all of it, consumed by this relentless pain worming its way through my body, my eyes becoming drier with each passing second. After so long, the act of screaming felt too boring, so I gave up, surrendered to the agony. You'd think I would have gotten used to the sensation. That's what I was hoping would happen, at least. But did it? Well, I think you already know the answer to that. Then, the flies showed up. Their arrival seemed to change everything. I went from being forced to wait on the floor, paralyzed until Andy woke up, to being forced to wait on the floor while several dozen flies swarmed around my face, landing on my cheek, buzzing into my ears. I decided to take up the art of screaming again once the flies tried squeezing between my lips. Next to me, Dad was also screaming, or attempting to scream. He sounded muffled, restrained. The flies weren't just after me. They were trying to infiltrate both of us. The screaming didn't scare him away like it was intended. I felt a rattling against my teeth, then a bizarre tickle in my throat. The flies were inside me, and there was nothing I could do to stop them because stupid Andy was somehow still asleep and I couldn't move, not one miserable limb. I was trapped in my own flesh as the flies explored my insides, and I wished more than anything for the roof to collapse and kill us all, truly obliterate our existence from this nonsensical world. But of course, the roof didn't fall, and I remained motionless as more flies landed on my exposed eyeballs, erasing my vision with their squirmy black bodies, their incessant buzzing drowning out all other sound. Dad screaming, Andy snoring, and, for a spell, flies were all I knew. Until something hard smacked me in the face, knocking my head to the side and scaring away the swarm of flies that had momentarily conquered my body. Andy stood above me, asking if I was okay, grabbing my arms and dragging me across the floor, and I slapped him away. I told him I was fine, told him he was hurting me. He was squeezing my arms too hard, and I wiggled free from his grip and stood up, so tired, so utterly exhausted, and Andy stared at me in shock, and I didn't understand why he was reacting like that until I realized, holy crap, I was standing. I was moving, I was talking, and down on the floor, Dad was also slowly climbing to his feet. Dazed, spitting out dead flies, which made me realize I could also spit again, and I put this rediscovered ability to good use, but no matter how many flies I expelled from my mouth, I was convinced there was at least one more somewhere inside me, hanging on for dear life, buzzing.
And that was section 1 of my new novel, Maggots Screaming, narrated by John Wayne Comunale. Stay tuned. Coming up next, section 2 of Maggots Screaming, titled Bloat. If you want to buy a copy of this book, go on over to ghoulishbooks.com. I sell signed copies through that website. If you want me to sign a paperback copy dedicated to you, personalized, I will do that. Go on over to Ghoulish Books. Get a copy of Maggots Screaming.
Live spooky, die spooky.
Rest in peace, Max.